Hello there, and welcome to Echoes of the Imperium. I'm truly glad you've arrived. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of soul who prefers to drift into sleep with thoughts of distant stars and ancient cosmic secrets instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey belongs to you. You don't need to do anything now, just rest. Let your mind grow quiet, your breath steady, and your body feel lighter, as if even the pull of gravity has begun to fade away. The first sign that something had gone wrong was the silence. An impossible, cosmic quiet that hung over the segmentum solar like the pause between a dying man's last two breaths. And in that suffocating stillness, I felt the familiar weight of destiny folding inward upon itself, as though the galaxy were drawing a final weary inhale before screaming. I had been a remembrancer once, spared execution only because an inquisitor, my master, believed I could record horrors in a way even the hardened agents of the throne could not. And so I found myself aboard the Black Basilica, a cathedral void ship drifting above Holy Terra during the hour. The Emperor's psychic radiance flickered for the first time in 10,000 years, its usual blinding intensity rippling like a candle in a draught, and the choir psychers fell to their knees in spontaneous agony, clutching their skulls as new screams bled into the Astronomican's light, not from within our galaxy, but from beyond it. As if the Emperor himself had suddenly faced something that could make even a god recoil. The Mechanicus adepts spoke of dimensional friction, a cold and clinical term for what the rest of us called dread. Gellerfields trembled as if something outside reality itself pressed its face against the membrane of our universe, smearing obscenities across the veil. And the black ships reported rifts, incisions in the Imperium that were not warp storms but wounds opening into other realms, other physical spaces, entire universes whose gravitational signatures and psychic textures defied classification by even the oldest Martian archivists. It was in those first hours of confusion that the High Lords convened in desperate secrecy, and my master, Inquisitor Asher Varn, took me with him into their dimly lit sanctum, a place that smelled of parchment, incense, and carefully controlled panic. There, the Lord Admiral's trembling voice described fleets sighted drifting in impossible formations around a breach near the halo stars. Armadas with architecture unlike anything in the Imperium or its myriad foes. Ships shaped like crystalline daggers, others like biomechanical leviathans, and some so mathematically perfect that the tech priests wept in jealously corrupted awe. What chilled me most wasn't the reports, but the tone in which they were delivered. For there was no bluster, no bravado, only the quiet admission that something new, something vast, had brushed our universe's surface like a megafauna brushing a diver, unaware that the smaller creature might break from fear alone. And then came the message, carried through the breach on harmonics that bypassed Vox systems entirely and seemed to vibrate inside human bone. A multilingual broadcast interpreted simultaneously in Gothic, Elder Lexicon, Kroot clicks, and even corrupted demonic tongues. We greet the Imperium of man. We come in observation. We come in curiosity. We come in multitudes. The room went deathly still. For the first time in my service, I saw the High Lords look like children out of their depth. It was then that the inquisitorial representative, Lord Varanus of the Ordo Ultima, rose with the stiff, ceremonial gravity of a man about to commit a necessary sin, and he uttered the decree that changed everything. We cannot permit the multiverse to observe us. We cannot permit unknown realities to map our weaknesses. The Imperium has stood for 10,000 years by striking first. The only answer is holy war. It was absurd. It was impossible, and yet it felt inevitable. For the Imperium has never understood diplomacy, only domination. And as the choir sang a wavering, unstable note that made the lumen globes flicker, I sensed the vastness of what was about to unfold. A war not for territory or survival, but for conceptual primacy. A war in which the Imperium would attempt to extinguish infinite parallel existences because it could not tolerate the idea of not being the center of creation. Still, to wage war upon the multiverse, one must first breach it. And so the Mechanicus unleashed their most heretical knowledge. Data vaults sealed since the first forging of the Phalanx. STC fragments so dangerous they were guarded by Skitarii whose bones were carved with self-immolation protocols, and warp equations that predated the Emperor's unification of old Earth, until, after days without sleep, they produced a mechanism that could forcibly tear open the rifts and stabilize them. The Transreality Spear, a massive spire of psychoreactive alloys designed, to anchor fleets across dimensional sheaths by binding their Geller fields to the Astronomicon like a harpoon line trailing back to humanity's single candle in the dark. I watched its activation from the Basilica's observation deck, feeling the air shudder as if Terra itself exhaled. Litanies were chanted, reactors roared, and the void tore open, cleanly, almost beautifully, as hexagonal plates of not light peeled back to reveal a corridor into another universe, a plane where the stars were arranged in impossible fractal patterns, spiraling like frozen music. The first Imperial armada surged forward under banners blackened with sanctified oils, and at their vanguard sailed the Abyssal Wrath, a battle barge so ancient its hull was rumored to contain fragments of the Emperor's original armor. As it passed through the rift, its Vox systems recorded a whisper, faint but unmistakably human. Another timeline, another Imperium, another you. The meaning of it gnawed at me. The idea that the Imperium might exist in infinite variations, some stronger, some weaker, some corrupted, terrified the High Lords. For nothing threatened their authority more than the possibility of versions of humanity unbound by their decrees. And then the first report came through. Not of battle, not of contact, of discovery. The Armada had emerged into a universe where humanity had never risen beyond its homeworld. A peaceful Earth that had never known the Emperor, never felt the lash of the Imperium or the corruption of chaos. And in that calm, ignorant world, orbital telescopes captured the arrival of our warships with innocent awe, mistaking them for celestial anomalies. They had no defenses, no fleets. Nothing but the fragile hope that first contact might bring wonder instead of annihilation. The lords looked to one another, then to Varanus, and he, without hesitation, without ceremony, gave the order that would become the opening shot of the multiversal crusade. Cleanse the timeline. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I wrote, because that was all a remembrancer could do, and so I recorded the moment humanity declared war on infinite realities, not for resources, not for survival, but because the Imperium could not tolerate the existence of a world where it was not already triumphant. And in the warp-lit gloom of the Basilica, as the screams of a peaceful Earth began transmitting through the astropathic channels like static soaked in blood, I realized something dreadful. This was only the first universe, the first branch of the infinite tree we would burn, and no matter how many victorious reports came in, no matter how many timelines were purged, the choir continued to whisper one phrase beneath their shuddering breaths: "They are watching us back." Even now, I can feel their gaze, those unseen multiversal powers peering into our reality like surgeons examining a malignant growth, deciding whether to excise us entirely or let the cancer metastasize. And as the Astronomicon flickered again, as if the Emperor himself sensed the danger rising beyond space and time, I leaned against the cold plasteel and felt dread settling in my bones like frost. This war had not truly begun. Not yet, but its shadow had already fallen across the Imperium, long and impossibly wide, stretching across dimensions like a hand reaching towards something it could not grasp, yet refused to let go. The screams of the peaceful Earth still echoed through the Basilica's Vox hollows when the second rift opened, larger, deeper, pulsing with a rhythmic distortion that made every lumen flicker like a heartbeat struggling to stay alive. And as I stood beside Inquisitor Varn on the command gallery, I felt an ache behind my eyes that wasn't pain but pressure, as though the universe itself were leaning inward to whisper a warning we refused to hear. The Mechanicus chanted Binharic litanies, praising the trans-reality spear as if it were a newborn god, their augmented voices stuttering with machine gasps as the spire's warp spines hummed, expanding the breach until reality thinned like stretched parchment. And on the other side, something stirred. Vast, luminescent, not hostile yet, but aware, undeniably aware. And the moment its presence brushed against our Geller field, I felt as though a hand made of light and memory had dipped into my skull, flipping through my thoughts like a scribe skimming a heretical text. I staggered. Varn did not. His eyes, half augmetic, half scarred by a demon he had once outwitted, narrowed with grim satisfaction. "They're studying us," he murmured. "Good, let them learn fear." But fear was not what I sensed emanating from the entity beyond the breach. It felt more like curiosity, as if we were ants crawling around a gunpowder keg, unaware of the spark we carried, and the entity, whatever it was, merely observed, taking notes for a future autopsy. Before I could voice that instinct, the tactical displays lit up with a flood of picked captures from the forward fleet. A new timeline, a new universe, and unlike the last one, this Earth had grown teeth. Void fortresses ringed its orbit, unrecognizable yet unmistakably human in silhouette. Sleek, silver, built with a mastery of physics that made our own ships look medieval, and their reactors emitted no warp signature whatsoever, operating instead on some clean, unfathomable principle beyond plasma, beyond atomics, beyond anything in the Mechanicus lexicon. Varn leaned closer to the hololith, expression unreadable. A technologically ascendant humanity, he muttered. Without the Emperor, without the warp. That alone was considered a blasphemy so severe an entire star system had once been purged for merely suggesting its possibility. And now we were looking at a version of mankind that had not only survived without him, but evidently prospered. Their Vox signals were crisp, ordered, disciplined, unlike the naive awe of the peaceful timeline. This humanity recognized us instantly as an intrusion and responded with readiness that bordered on predatory calm. The bridge crew watched in fascinated terror as their fleets approached our vanguard. Ships of mirror-bright alloy, engines leaving geometric contrails as though bending the vacuum itself, and at their head a colossal vessel shaped like a spearhead of glass and starlight. "They aren't afraid of us," whispered a junior officer. "They don't believe we're gods." Varn's jaw tightened. "Then they must learn." And just like that, the Imperium repeated its ancient sin, the assumption that firepower equaled divine mandate. That confidence equaled heresy, and with a curt gesture he authorized a full salvo from the Abyssal Wrath's broadside cannons. I watched the rounds streak across the void, molten slugs trailing banners of superheated gas, each one capable of cracking a moon. And then I watched them vanish. Not explode, not deflect, vanish, snuffed out mid-flight like sparks in a storm, erased by a thin blue distortion emanating from the enemy flagship, a kind of shimmering shield that did not block matter so much as deny its existence entirely. The bridge fell silent. Even the tech priests stilled, their mechadendrites drooping in stunned confusion. A second volley was fired, this time with plasma torpedoes enough to erase continents, erased again, effortlessly. When the enemy answered, they did so not with rage, not with triumph, but with the cold precision of a surgeon cutting away a tumor. A single beam lanced from their flagship, thin as a needle, pale as winter sunlight, and it touched the lead Imperial cruiser, which simply folded inward on itself like paper, collapsing into a point before disappearing entirely. No explosion, no debris, no scream, just absence. The crew around me paled as if witnessing the birth of a new kind of terror, the terror of insignificance. The Imperium had waged war against gods, daemons, Xenos empires, and traitor legions, but never before against a humanity that had outgrown the need for tyranny or the warp, a humanity efficient enough to remove threats without hatred. "They see us as an anomaly," I whispered. "A hazard." "Not an enemy?" Varn turned to me slowly. "And what does that matter?" he asked, voice low. "If they do not kneel, they must burn." He ordered the full fleet forward. The hull of the Basilica shuddered as macro cannons cycled, as lance batteries primed, as entire swarms of attack craft streaked into the breach like angry fireflies. But before they could reach the enemy, the rift itself shook violently, the edges warping like a mouth gagging on something sour. And suddenly the opposing fleets withdrew with impossible speed, not retreating in fear, but repositioning with purpose, aligning themselves in a formation that made no sense to human strategy. Then the universe on the other side changed, its color shifted, its stars dimmed. Its void deepened into a black so absolute it seemed to drink the light from our own deck lamps. And in that blackness behind the withdrawing fleets, something massive blinked into existence. No, not blinked, arrived in a way that bent causality, as if it had always been there and we were only now perceiving it. A shape too large to comprehend, a shadow of infinite facets, like a hyperdimensional structure forced into three-dimensional space, its geometry shifting in ways that made my stomach churn. The choir psychers collapsed instantly, blood streaming from their noses and ears. Even the Gellerfield groaned as if buckling under a weight it was never designed to bear. "What is that?" someone whispered. The enemy fleet transmitted a single compressed data burst before vanishing into the deeper dark, a warning, translated automatically by our cogitators. "You have trespassed into a protected continuum." Withdraw immediately. Do not awaken it further. But the Imperium does not withdraw. The Imperium does not fear warnings, and the shadow on the other side of the rift turned toward us. I felt it, not through sight, not through sound, but through the gnawing of something ancient and hungry brushing against my thoughts like a predator sniffing at a cage. For the first time since the opening of the multiversal war, I felt true horror, the kind that makes the soul want to crawl out of the body and flee. That thing was not a weapon, not a machine, not a god. It was a concept that should never have been perceived. And as the trans-reality spear groaned under the strain of holding the rift open, I understood something Varn and the High Lords could not. This war would not be waged by the Imperium alone. Something else, something multiversal, had been awakened by our aggression, and it was now aware of humanity's existence across infinite realities. And it was hungry. The shadow did not move at first. Rather, reality around it moved, folding like a shroud being pulled back from a corpse. And as the rift destabilized under the weight of its presence, I felt the air aboard the basilica grow thin, as though the creature's mere awareness was siphoning the atmosphere from our lungs. Alarms wailed in mismatched pitches, cogitators glitched into recursive error chants, and the tech priests screamed Binharic curses as the trans-reality spear's stabilizer loops began to melt from the inside out, the metal turning to bubbling slag that dripped onto the shrine deck like molten tears. Inquisitor Varn did not flinch. His gaze, sharp with fanatic purpose, locked on the void where the creature loomed, its form an architecture of impossible angles that reshaped themselves with every attempt my eyes made to understand it. "We hold the breach," he commanded, as if speaking loudly enough could intimidate the multiversal titan into retreat. But even his reinforced vocal implants could not hide the tremor beneath his words. The Imperial fleet pressed forward, unaware, or refusing to admit, that our weapons had been rendered meaningless. Macro shells flickered out of existence, plasma beams curled like smoke, and torpedoes detonated prematurely from sheer gravitational distortion. Then the creature changed. It expanded, not physically, but perceptually, each shift altering the colors of the stars behind it, as though our universe's laws were struggling to overlay themselves onto something that had never known their touch. The choir psychers on Deck 42 began chanting incoherently, their voices blending into a layered wail that rose and fell like a dirge. Through them, something spoke, not in words, not in thoughts, in impressions, images seared into the mind's eye. A tree with infinite branches, each branch a universe a flicker in an endless storm. And us, the Imperium, appeared as a spreading rot across those branches, a bruise darkening reality itself. When the psychers finally burst, blood, bone, and astral flame erupting from their skulls, the meaning remained etched in my mind. Whatever this entity was, it had not awakened because of the alternate humanity. It had awakened because of us. Because the Imperium had forced open the multiverse like a burglar prying open a sacred reliquary, and in doing so had attracted the attention of one of the wardens who hunted such trespassers. "We are outmatched," I whispered, barely aware I had spoken aloud. Varn turned sharply toward me, expression curdling into disdain. "Faith does not measure the enemy. Faith unravels it." But as he spoke, the massive shadow drifted closer. Not as a ship approaches, but as an idea approaches comprehension, and the rift convulsed, distorting into fractal spirals that made several crewmen vomit from sensory overload. The ship's hololith sparked alive with fresh imagery from our forward scouts. More universes. Glimpsed through branching subrifts, the creature's presence was inadvertently opening. A galaxy-sized labyrinth where orcs had achieved godhood through collective belief. A quiet cosmos where Eldar ruled unchallenged, their empire never broken. A horrifying reflection where Tyranids had consumed all organic matter, leaving behind oceans of chitin and instinct. A mirror Imperium ruled not by the High Lords, but by a resurrected War Master Horus crowned in golden flame. The visions came too fast to process, the rifts widening like wounds in a cadaver. "It's destabilizing the multiversal structure," a tech priest rasped, sparks dancing across his mechadendrites. "Probability fields collapsing. Dimensional integrity nearing." His head split open as an arc of blue lightning danced across his cranial implants, frying him where he stood. Dex shuddered. Gravity flickered. For a brief moment I saw the basilica not as steel and prayer, but as a thin, flickering projection, its mass stuttering between existence and deletion, like a half-finished sketch waiting for the artist's hand to either complete or erase it. And then, impossibly, communication came through. Not from our fleet, not from the enemy humanity, from somewhere else. The Vox crackled with 1,000 overlapping voices, speaking 1,000 dialects of Gothic simultaneously, some archaic, some futuristic, some warped, some perfect, until all the voices unified in a single harmonic tone. If you remain, it will consume you. It will consume us all. Varn staggered, his jaw tightening. Identify yourselves. The Vox answered with a calm that chilled me more than any demon screech ever had. We are the Imperium. Everyone froze. Even the lumen globes halted, their flickering for a heartbeat, as if the universe itself paused to witness the impossibility of the claim. More signals followed, each from a different frequency, a different dimension, a different timeline, all claiming the same thing. They were the Imperium of man, not splinter factions, entire empires, hundreds of them, thousands, variations of humanity spanning realities, unified not by alliance, but by shared doom. The multiversal wardens, these hyperdimensional sentinels, awakened whenever one reality intruded upon another too violently, and each time they annihilated both sides to prevent the infection of dimensional entropy. We must close the rift, one alternate Imperium broadcasted. Before it fully manifests, we must unite our fleets, another transmitted, or all versions of Terra fall. Others begged, threatened, warned. Each voice carried desperation sharpened by experience. This wasn't the first time an Imperium had tried to conquer beyond its own reality. It was simply the first time ours had. Lies, Varn spat. Fabricated psi-illusion. The Emperor is singular. Humanity is singular. There is no other Imperium. But his denial crumbled as the shadow entity shifted again, its presence erasing. Several incoming transmissions mid-sentence, as though it considered any reality acknowledging it a contaminant needing removal. Inquisitor, I breathed, gripping the railing as the deck pitched under another wave of distortion. They're not lying. They're us, or versions of us, and they've all failed against this thing. Varn's eyes, lit by the flickering hololith, hardened into something terrible. Then we shall succeed where they did not. With a cold gesture, he ordered the basilica deeper into the rift, its engines howling like tortured beasts as they strained against realities pulling in a dozen directions at once. Imperial warships followed, banners trailing through colors that did not exist moments before. The creature loomed larger, now close enough that I could see shifting structures beneath its surface, geometries within geometries, like a cathedral built inside a corpse built inside a concept. And then it noticed us, not metaphorically, not vaguely. It focused. Every lumen went out. The Emperor's psychic light dimmed. The void itself bled into view, a curtain pulling back on an endless, hungry stage. And for a heartbeat, just one, the creature's mind brushed mine. I saw the death of 1,000 Imperiums. I saw timelines folded like discarded parchment. I saw Terra cracked open like an egg. I saw the Emperor, our Emperor, standing before the monstrosity, golden throne dimmed, his light flickering as the creature reached toward him with a limb made of memories and unmaking. And then I saw nothing, because seeing more would have destroyed me. When the lights returned, faint and sickly, I collapsed to my knees, shaking, my breath shallow and wet. Varn knelt beside me, gripping my shoulder with a hand that trembled despite his iron will. "What did you see?" he demanded. My voice cracked as I whispered the only truth left. "We have awakened a god that hunts gods." The moment I whispered that we had awakened a god that hunts gods, the atmosphere aboard the basilica changed. Not physically, though the air still trembled with warp fire and dimensional static, but spiritually, as if every soul aboard the ship felt a collective shiver crawl down the spine of humanity itself. and in that dreadful hush I sensed the Inquisitor beside me harden into something colder than faith, more rigid than dogma, resolve, unbreakable and utterly lethal, the kind that has ended civilizations in the name of preservation. A god that hunts gods, Varn murmured, tasting the words like they were venom he intended to spit back at creation. Then we deny it prey. His eyes, half augmetic and half haunted, flicked toward the hololith where the creature's shifting silhouette filled the display like a living eclipse. Its geometry warped across the screen in twisting spirals and collapsing angles, each movement making several crewmen bleed from the ears. Yet Varn stared into it with the terrible fascination of a man glimpsing not the enemy, but the test of his entire existence. Turbulence shook the basilica as the creature exhaled, if it could be called that, sending a ripple through the rift that nearly tore our whole plating apart. The ship lurched, alarms screamed, and several novices were flung into the air before crashing against the deck, with bones splitting like dry branches. I clung to the railing, breath catching as I watched the void ripple and tear. And through those tears, glimpses of other universes flashed again. One where Terra was a crystalline fortress world the size of a small sun. One where the Emperor strode across battlefields alive and unbound. One where chaos reigned openly, the eye of terror swallowing half the galaxy. And one where no humans existed at all, the stars empty and silent. The visions blurred, interlacing like tangled threads in a cosmic loom. And the shadow entity drifted across all of them simultaneously, as though reality were nothing more than an atlas it leafed through to find which stories to end next. Suddenly, our Vox systems flared with incoming transmissions from the alternate Imperiums again. Some urgent, some panicked, some chillingly calm. One voice crackled through, deep and resonant, belonging to a man who sounded so similar to our Varn that my blood ran cold. Your Inquisition is making the same mistake ours did. Turn back, seal the breach. You cannot confront a multiversal warden. Another voice, softer, exhausted, whispered, we tried to fight it. We tried to reason with it. And for that, we lost 917 Terras. A third voice screamed wordlessly before dissolving into static, as if its entire timeline had been snuffed out mid-sentence. The bridge fell silent. Even the tech priests, half mad with overloaded sensory implants, paused as if the sheer weight of those voices pressed on their cogitators. Varn grit his teeth. Cowards, he muttered. Failures. If they lost 900 Terras, we will lose none. But his denial cracked slightly when the hololith flickered and displayed something new. A colossal Imperial Citadel ship emerging from a sub-rift. An Imperium flagship from another universe. Its hull adorned with statues of Primarchs we had never known. Some alive, some uncorrupted, some draped in laurels instead of chains. Its Vox beacon pulsed with a message encoded in a cipher so ancient, even the Mechanicus recoiled in awe. Varn ordered it decrypted with trembling fingers. The translation bled across the hollow in jagged Gothic lettering. We are the Imperium victorious. We destroyed our traitor legions. We ended the long war. We tamed the warp. And even we fell before the Warden. The bridge fell into a cold, suffocating silence. If an Imperium that had achieved everything ours had failed to accomplish still perished, what chance did we have? The answer came in the form of a violent shudder that nearly snapped the basilica's spine. The shadow entity twisted, warping the rift into a spiraling vortex of colors that belonged in no spectrum known to man. The Geller field screamed as cracks spiderwebbed across its luminous lattice, the barrier between sanity and madness shredding like soaked parchment. It's feeding on the breach, one tech priest croaked, growing stronger with each passing second. And then the creature reached forward. A limb, or the shadow of one, unfurled from its mass, stretching across universes as though distance meant nothing. It didn't strike. It didn't claw. It simply touched the nearest Imperial cruiser. The ship did not explode. It did not melt. It did not burn. It simply ceased, unwritten from reality like a word erased from a page, leaving only a smear of probability dust drifting where it once had been. The crew gasped, horrified. That cruiser held 100,000 souls, and now none of them had ever existed. Another limb unfurled, brushing a battle barge. The same erasure, whole lives, whole histories, gone. Panic rippled through the fleet. Even the Adeptus Astartes transmitted clipped, shaken reports, their legendary discipline wavering under the weight of facing something no training, no gene forging, no indoctrination had prepared them to confront. The alternate Imperiums sent warnings again, more frantic this time. Do not fire upon it. Do not touch it. Close the rift before it fully anchors. The warden cannot be killed. It can only be unobserved. You must collapse your side of the breach. Cut off the causal thread. Destroy the spear. Varn's eyes widened, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw fear. True, unfiltered fear. Break through the iron wall of his conviction. Destroy the spear, he repeated, voice thin. Collapse the rift, sealing us on this side. I swallowed hard. We would be trapped with it. Yes, he said, a haunted whisper. But the alternative is worse. Because if the warden crossed fully into our universe, it would not stop at the Basilica. It would not stop at Terra. It would not stop at the galaxy. It would cleanse every universe connected to ours through psychic resonance, every reality where humanity's echo rang. Billions of timelines, trillions of futures, entire branches of existence. Gone. And still, even knowing all of this, the High Lords, watching through astropathic link, refused the order. Their faces flickered across the hollow as distorted half-formed projections. You will not destroy our greatest creation, one hissed. The spear is the key to our dominion. Another, calmer but more terrifying, murmured, better infinite war than retreat. Their arrogance sealed it. The warden surged forward, its form expanding across the rift like a storm front of collapsing geometry, reaching not just for our fleet, but for the very structure of possibility. The Basilica groaned, decks split, runes sparked. The Geller field flickered like a dying flame. And then I heard it, soft, nearly lost beneath the chaos, a whisper from the Psychers who weren't entirely dead, their minds drifting like ghosts in the warp. If the Imperium won't close the rift, the multiverse will. The hollow flashed white as dozens, hundreds of alternate Imperium fleets surged into position, their weapons charging in perfect synchronicity, not to kill the warden, but to destroy us, to destroy the spear, to force the collapse. Varn stared in disbelief as target lock symbols settled across our fleet. They're going to fire, my voice trembled. Because we won't. And then the first shot ignited the void. I remember the first time I realized the Imperium had begun to fracture under the weight of infinite battlefronts. Because I felt it first not in the warp tides that coiled around my senses, nor in the telepathic scream lines of 1,000 dying worlds, but in the silence, an absence so profound it carved itself into the marrow of my thoughts. A quiet that had no right to exist in a universe drowning in unending war. And it was in that moment that I understood the reality we had created. A multiverse where every version of mankind was now a battlefield. Every reflection a war zone, every iteration a theater of extinction. And no matter how far we pushed into the branching corridors of creation, the Imperium's hunger for dominion only grew more ravenous, more desperate, more hollow, until not even the echoes of victory could hide the truth that we had become the very thing the multiverse feared most. In the beginning, we had believed the campaign would be a sequence of purifying crusades, swift, righteous, decisive. But by the time I walked through the shimmering breach of the 47th parallel rift, a tear in reality large enough to swallow fleets whole, the campaign had metastasized into a cancerous sprawl of contradictory timelines, each demanding fleets, soldiers, psychers, titan legions, and the Emperor's name etched into the sky like a commandment. And as I stepped into that impossible dimension, I felt thousands of versions of myself breathing against the membrane of my mind, separated by thin layers of possibility, each of them fighting a war they could not win, each of them failing in a different way, each of them whispering the same warning I refused to hear. The multiverse is not a battlefield, it is a mirror. The 47th parallel universe was a cold one, a dying one, where suns flickered with premature decay and planets drifted untethered from orbits that had long since collapsed into gravitational ruin, and hanging in the void like mausoleums were the skeletal remains of star empires that had never grown beyond infancy. Their ruins drifted like drifting ossuaries, carved by cosmic erosion into hollow frames that looked like the rib cages of extinct gods. And as our fleet emerged from the rift, our sensorium screens flickered with readings that contradicted themselves every second, as though the universe was unsure of its own existence. At the heart of this place floated what the cartograph servitors labeled as the polyhedron citadel, a geometrical impossibility of refractive surfaces that bent space around it like a prayer folded too many times. And inside that crystalline labyrinth lived the inhabitants of this universe, a species not of flesh or machine, but of memory, pure memory, beings who existed only as recorded consciousness, the last remnants of civilizations that had chosen preservation over survival. And when the Imperium discovered they were not bound by physical form, the High Lords declared them an abomination, a violation of the sacred human template, a heresy against the ecclesiarchy's doctrines of flesh sanctity. And so a crusade was declared not against a foe of armies or weapons, but against a species whose only crime was refusing to die in the manner the Imperium demanded. The first time I spoke with one of them, if speaking is even the correct term, it reached into my mind with a gentleness I had never known, a soft resonance that felt like memories being replayed in reverse, and it showed me its final living day. A planet drowning in magma storms, skies falling like shattered glass, oceans evaporating in a single breath, and as its physical body burned away, it chose to upload its consciousness into a prism of condensed photonic lattice where thought could live eternally, untouched by war, and I felt its sorrow when it realized humanity had come not to understand, but to erase. I remember whispering to it through the psychic veil, "Why do you not fight back?" And its answer haunts me still, because resistance requires hope, and we no longer possess it. The Imperium, of course, had no such weakness. Hope was irrelevant, faith was fuel, and war was the Emperor's language, so the order was given. And the glow of hundreds of lance batteries lit the silent void as our fleet unleashed judgment upon a species incapable of raising shields or firing weapons. And each time one of their crystalline memory structures cracked under the bombardment, I felt the psychic wail of a billion lived lives shatter into dust, drifting as luminescent particles into the void like the ashes of fallen angels. But the multiverse has a way of retaliating not through armies, but through reflection. And the deeper we burned our way through the 47th parallel dimension, the more unstable our own identities became. Our memories flickered with impossible revisions, entire events rewritten, comrades I had known for decades suddenly forgotten, timelines erasing themselves like sand brushed from a tabletop, until I could barely remember who I had been before the crusade began. And it was then I realized the truth the memory beings had spoken. The multiverse was not designed for conquest. It was designed to resist assimilation by unraveling the conqueror from within. And yet, the Imperium pressed forward, unrelenting, unbreakable, because to retreat would be to admit the Emperor's domain had limits, and such an idea was heresy. I saw entire battalions collapse into non-existence as their timelines were overwritten by adjacent universes. I saw Space Marines fight duplicates of themselves wearing armor that bore sigils from futures that had not yet happened. I saw navigators go insane as they stared into alternate versions of the Astronomicon burning in patterns that contradicted their own existence. And through it all, one question circled my thoughts like a carrion bird. How many versions of humanity must we erase before we understand that conquering ourselves is not victory? In the end, the polyhedron citadel imploded under the strain of memory saturation, collapsing into a singularity of lost lives. A monument to civilizations erased not by war, but by our inability to let any world exist without our boot upon it. And as the rift behind us trembled, threatening to seal itself forever, I looked back one final time and wondered if, somewhere in the infinite branches of possibility, there existed a version of the Imperium that had chosen understanding over annihilation. But even if such a universe existed, I knew we would find it, and we would burn it too, because the Imperium does not conquer threats. It conquers truths, and as we fled the collapsing dimension, I felt the last remaining echo of the memory beings reach out to me with a whisper shaped like a dying star. You cannot win a war against mirrors. And I realized I no longer knew whether the words came from them, or from the version of myself that I lost somewhere in the multiverse. There is a moment every warrior fears, though none will ever admit it. A moment when the battle hymns fall silent in the soul, and the truth reveals itself like a wound that never stops bleeding. And for me, that moment arrived as the Imperium prepared to commit its greatest sin, the invasion of the Origin Spire, the mythical axis of all branching realities, a structure older than the warp, older than matter, older than the very concept of time, a tower of pure metaphysical stone rising endlessly through layers of existence like the spine of the multiverse itself. And as our ships descended toward it through dimensions that folded and unfolded like breathing lungs, I realized with cold certainty that we were no longer fighting aliens, heretics, or divergent mankind. We were fighting the architecture of reality, the fundamental laws that kept all universes from collapsing into one homogeneous empire under our boot. And there, in the heart of that impossible place, I finally understood the terrible truth. The Imperium did not simply declare war on the multiverse. It declared war on possibility itself. The Origin Spire loomed before us like a cosmic cathedral forged from the bones of extinct realities, its surfaces shifting between obsidian stone, liquid starlight, and impossible runic circuitry that braided together timelines like strands of divine hair. And the moment our drop barges made contact, the entire structure resonated with a sound that felt like every version of myself screaming in unison. I staggered, gripping the cold metal railing as memories, futures and unmade pasts collided in my skull, fracturing my sense of identity like a mirror struck by a hammer. And through the psychic storm, I heard the whisper of the memory beings we had annihilated in the previous dimension. You cannot conquer the origin because you are born from it. But the Imperium knew no fear. The Custodes marched first, golden demigods whose armor flickered between thousands of alternate patterns as their existence struggled to stabilize. And behind them came the Grey Knights, chanting litanies that bled silver into the air, their voices echoing across 1,000 realities simultaneously. Reality warriors bred to wage war on the impossible. And even they faltered as they stared at the spiraling interior of the spire, a corridor that twisted like a Mobius loop around itself, lined with vaults containing every iteration of humanity that ever existed. Post-human, pre-human, machine ascended, psyker liberated, warp dead, immortal, extinct, corrupted, perfected. Every branch, every path, every dream and nightmare mankind had ever walked stood preserved here like specimens in the Museum of Creation. The High Lords had ordered these vaults destroyed, declaring them threats to imperial orthodoxy. Anything that contradicted the sacred doctrine of the one true humanity was to be purged. And when the demolition servitors moved forward with their melta-charges, I felt something inside me break, a crack spreading through the last stable part of my identity. Because as I stared into those vaults, I saw futures where humanity had achieved peace without tyranny, unity without conquest, enlightenment without war. And I knew with a clarity that burned, that the Imperium could not allow these futures to exist. Because they revealed the greatest heresy of all, that humanity did not need the Imperium to survive. As the first vault detonated, a shockwave rippled through the spire, not a physical blast, but a conceptual one, rewriting the laws of probability in a radius of light years. Entire battle companies flickered in and out of existence, some replaced by alternate versions of themselves wearing armor from timelines where they had never sworn allegiance to Terra, and others erased entirely, overwritten by iterations that died centuries ago. The Custodes, unshakable paragons of the throne, faltered as their gene seed wavered, with some becoming giants of chrome from mechanized timelines, others turning to living light, and a few dissolving into gold dust that drifted through the air like the ashes of forgotten gods. Through it all, the spire pulsed with a deep, mournful reverberation, as though the multiverse itself was pleading with us to stop, to turn back, to understand the catastrophe we were unleashing. But the Imperium does not retreat. It endures, it crushes, it devours. And so the order came down from the upper decks of the flagship Gloria Mundi, reached the summit chamber, and seized control of the anchor node, the core that stabilized every universe, the heart of all existence. If the Imperium could claim it, they would become the authors of creation, the sole architects of reality, and all alternate futures would become subordinate to the will of Terra. We climbed the ascension path, a staircase that shifted gravity with each step, where time thickened like honey and memories unspooled out of order. And as I climbed, I saw versions of myself walking parallel pathways, one in chaplain armor, another corrupted by the warp, a third, a withered old man sitting at a desk writing a memoir of a war that never happened. And for a moment, our eyes met, and I realized they all feared me just as I feared them. Because only one of us would be allowed to exist when this was over. At the summit chamber, reality thinned until it felt like walking through the skin of a dream. At the center hovered the anchor node, a crystalline sphere containing every possible timeline intertwined like neurons in a colossal cosmic brain. And standing before it, waiting as if he had always been there, was a figure wrapped in robes made of shifting universes. A man whose face flickered between countless variations of humanity. His voice was quiet, but it shook the air like falling mountains. I am the Continuum Warden. I guard what must never be owned. The custodes raised their blades. The Grey Knights leveled their halberds. And yet none moved, because the Warden lifted a single hand and reality itself froze. Not time, not space. Reality, the underlying system of rules that made existence possible. He looked at me, not at the soldiers behind me, not at the armies or the Imperium itself, me, and said, with a sorrow older than galaxies, you have come not to conquer the multiverse, but to erase every future where mankind thrives without chains. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to shout that we brought unity, stability, protection, but I had walked too many broken worlds. I had killed too many versions of humanity. I had seen the vaults, and so I said nothing. The Warden stepped aside, revealing the anchor node, offering it to us, not in defeat but in grief, as though he already knew the ending. The custodes moved to seize it, and in that moment, the multiverse screamed. The scream was not sound, but the collapse of every timeline at once, an implosion of possibility, a cascade failure of existence spiraling inward like a dying star. The spire shook, the vaults shattered, the alternate humanities howled as they were erased, and I realized with crystalline clarity that the Imperium had never been fighting the multiverse. The multiverse had been defending itself from us. The anchor node dimmed, flickered, and then broke, not shattered, not exploded, broke, like a promise, like a vow, like a fragile truth crushed beneath the heel of an empire that could not tolerate the idea of not being absolute. As the spire collapsed, as universes merged and annihilated each other, as the fleet flickered out of existence one ship at a time, I felt the Warden's voice echo through my mind one final time. When you wage war on infinity, you must be prepared to lose everything finite. And now, as I drift through the wreckage of unmade realities, a ghost of a soldier who may no longer exist in any stable universe, I wonder if the Imperium will ever understand the price of its hunger, or whether, somewhere beyond the collapse, a surviving timeline will remember that there once was a man who tried to look into the multiverse and saw not enemies, but reflections of what humanity might have become, if only we had allowed it to choose its own path.